Welcome to Subscribe. Continuously updated.
The rain started right before I pulled into the old church parking lot. Figures, right? 13 years away from Carson Mills, and the town welcomes me back with a downpour that turns the gravel lot into mud soup. I killed the engine of my rental car and just sat there for a minute, listening to the rain hammer the roof. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles had gone white. Look, I knew showing up at my sister Sophia's wedding unannounced was going to be complicated. But you know what? After 13 years of silence, I figured she owed me at least a conversation. Maybe an apology. Maybe just something. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My hair was frizzing up from the humidity. Classic. I could almost hear Sophia's voice in my head. Lena, honey, you really should have gotten that Japanese straightening treatment I told you about. It's not that expensive. Don't you want to look your best? I sighed. Old habit. The sigh, I mean. The kind you do before you walk into a room full of people who've already decided what kind of person you are. The church wasn't really a church anymore. Some developer bought it 5 years ago and turned it into a wedding venue. St. Anthony's, it used to be called. Mom brought us here every Sunday, me and Sophia, dressed in matching dresses that Sophia always picked out. I hated those dresses. Always too frilly, always too pink. But I wore them anyway because it was easier than fighting. The building still looked like a church from the outside. Stone walls, a steeple that needed new shingles, a bell that hasn't rung in 2 decades. But the parking lot had been expanded, and there were these fancy garden lights lining the walkway, the kind that cost more per fixture than I made in a week when I first left home. Wedding flowers were tied to every lamp post. White roses and lavender. Very Sophia. Very carefully arranged to look effortless. I stepped out of the car and the rain hit me immediately. Cold for October. I pulled my coat tighter and walked toward the entrance, my heels sinking into the wet gravel with every step. I should have worn different shoes. I should have done a lot of things differently. A young woman with a clipboard stopped me at the door. She was wearing one of those little headset things, all official, like she was running security for the White House instead of my sister's wedding. Name? She asked, not looking up. Lena Miller. That got her attention. She looked up, blinked twice, and I saw recognition flicker across her face. Then confusion. Then that tight, polite smile people get when they don't know what to do with you. Oh, she said. You're Sophia's sister? That's right. She didn't mention. She wouldn't have, I said. I'm a surprise. I didn't wait for her to figure out whether to stop me or not. I just walked past her, through the heavy wooden doors, and into the lobby. The smell hit me first. Lavender and old wood and something sweet, maybe lilies. The lobby had been decorated within an inch of its life. Flowers everywhere. Candles on every surface. A big sign in gold script, Tom and Sophia forever begins today. Forever. Sure. Sophia's idea of forever usually lasted about as long as it took to get what she wanted. I made my way to the main hall. The doors were open, and I could see the guests already seated, maybe 150 people packed into those old pews. I recognized some faces. Cousins who'd never called. Neighbors who'd seen me at the bus station 13 years ago with a single suitcase and hadn't said a word. Mom was in the front row, of course, wearing a pale blue dress, her gray hair pinned up, her hands folded in her lap like she was already posing for the family photo. My stomach twisted. I hadn't seen any of these people since I was 19 years old. And honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted to see them now. But I was here. Might as well commit. I slipped into the back pew, as far from the front as I could get. A few heads turned. I heard whispers. Is that? No, it can't be. She hasn't been back since. I kept my eyes forward, my back straight, my face as neutral as I could make it. 13 years as a freelance tax consultant teaches you how to sit in uncomfortable rooms full of people who don't want you there. The music started. Some violin piece I didn't recognize, probably something Sophia found on a wedding inspiration board and decided was absolutely perfect. The bridesmaids came down the aisle first. 3 of them, in dusty rose dresses, smiling those fixed wedding party smiles. I didn't know any of them. Sophia's new friends, I guess. The friends she made after I was gone. Then the flower girl, a little kid who couldn't have been more than 5, throwing petals like she was trying to murder the floor. It was kind of adorable, honestly. And then Sophia. She came in on the arm of Uncle David, Mom's younger brother, since Dad had passed years ago. Her dress was stunning, I had to admit. Simple, elegant, no lace or ruffles or any of the frilly nonsense she used to love. It made her look almost sincere. Her blonde hair was swept up in this complicated braid thing, and her smile was so bright it almost hurt to look at. Almost. Because I knew that smile. I'd seen it before. It was the smile she wore when she told Mom I'd stolen $300 from her jewelry box. The smile she wore when she said I'd been sneaking out at night with some boy I'd never even spoken to. The smile she wore when the lies were working. Tom was waiting at the altar. He seemed solid. Good shoulders. Nice smile. The kind of guy who probably fixed his own truck and called his mom every Sunday. I'd looked him up before I came. Local builder, good reputation, no scandals. Exactly the kind of man Sophia would want. Not because she loved him, though maybe she did, in her way, but because he was the kind of man people admired. The ceremony began. Prayers, readings, some poem about love being patient and kind. The usual. I let it wash over me, watching Mom dab at her eyes with a tissue, watching the guests smile and nod, watching Sophia play the part of the radiant bride. And then the officiant stepped forward. He was an older man, maybe late 60s, with white hair and a voice that had some weight to it. Judge Martinez, I found out later. Retired. A family friend of Tom's, I think. He looked at the couple. He looked at the audience. His eyes scanned the room, passing over me, then snapping back. He frowned. Just slightly. Just for a second. Then he cleared his throat. Before we proceed, he said, I have an unusual question. The room went quiet. Not the quiet of a wedding ceremony, the quiet of something being wrong. I was reviewing the paperwork earlier today, Judge Martinez continued. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. The contract for this venue. The deposit, the insurance, the credit check, all of it. Sophia's smile tightened. Just a fraction. If I hadn't spent my whole childhood learning to read her face, I would have missed it. And I noticed something odd, the judge said. The name on the contract. The primary signatory. It's not Thomas Harrison. It's not Sophia Miller. He looked directly at me. Lena Miller. Every head in the room turned. I felt 150 pairs of eyes lock onto me like I was a deer in the middle of the highway. Is there a reason, Judge Martinez said, why your signature is on your sister's wedding venue contract? Silence. Complete, total silence. Even the rain seemed to stop, just for a second. I opened my mouth. Closed it. Looked at Sophia. Her face was pale. Her perfect bridal smile had vanished, replaced by something I hadn't seen in years. Fear. Pure, unfiltered, oh God, I've been caught fear. Mom turned around in her pew. Our eyes met. I saw recognition, then confusion, then something else. Something older. Something that looked an awful lot like accusation. What have you done now, Lena? That look. I knew that look. It was the look she'd given me 13 years ago, standing in my bedroom doorway while I packed my single suitcase, Sophia crying crocodile tears downstairs about her missing money, the $300 that had turned up in my dresser drawer. The $300 I'd never taken. Well? Judge Martinez said. I think we'd all like to know. I stood up. My legs felt shaky, but my voice, when I found it, was steady. I don't know, I said. I never signed anything for this wedding. I haven't spoken to my sister in 13 years. The whispers started. Louder now. Not hiding anymore. Sophia's hands were shaking. I could see it, even from the back of the room. She put one hand on Tom's arm, and he looked down at her, his brow furrowed. Honey? Tom said. What's he talking about? I don't know, Sophia said quickly. Too quickly. There must be some mistake. Lena, what are you even doing here? You weren't invited. You just show up and there it was. The pivot. The counterattack. Classic Sophia. When in doubt, make Lena the problem. I came because I got a letter, I said. My voice was still calm, but my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. From the credit agency. Turns out someone used my name to co-sign on a $60,000 venue contract. And apparently, that someone was in a hurry, because they didn't even bother to change the address or the social security number. More whispers. Someone gasped. Judge Martinez held up a hand. Let's all calm down. Miss Lena Miller, are you saying you did not sign this contract? I'm saying I need to see the paperwork, I said. Because I think my signature's been forged. The word hit the room like a rock through a window. Forged. Sophia's face went from pale to gray. Tom stepped back from her. Just a step. Just enough. Mom stood up. Lena, she said, her voice carrying that old warning tone. You need to leave. You're ruining your sister's wedding. Am I? I said. Or is she ruining it all by herself? And that's when Sophia did the one thing I didn't expect. She started crying. Not the fake tears either. Real ones. Ugly crying, the kind that smears your mascara and makes your nose run. Please, she said. Please, can we do this somewhere else? Please, not here. Not in front of everyone. Tom put his arm around her. He looked confused, hurt, all the things a groom shouldn't look on his wedding day. But he also looked like a man who wanted answers. No, he said quietly. I think we need to figure this out. Right now. Judge Martinez nodded slowly. Let's take a recess. The bride, the groom, and Miss Lena Miller, please join me in the vestry. As I walked down the aisle toward the front of the church, the whispers followed me like a wave. I passed Mom. She wouldn't look at me. I passed my cousins, my old neighbors, people who'd known me since I was in diapers. None of them met my eyes. But I walked with my head up, my heart pounding, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. Because here's the thing. I had come here expecting a fight. I just didn't know Sophia had already been fighting me for 13 years without me knowing it. And I had no idea how much worse it was about to get. The vestry smelled like old wood, lemon polish, and wet wool from the raincoats people had hung up before the ceremony. It was a small room off the side of the chapel, the kind of place where the minister kept his spare robes and the choir stored their sheet music. Not the kind of place where you'd expect a wedding to fall apart. But here we were. Judge Martinez closed the heavy oak door and the noise from the church dropped away like someone had cut a cord. The silence was almost worse. You could hear every breath, every little shift of someone's feet on the old floorboards. Sophia stood near the window, her white dress glowing in the gray afternoon light. She wasn't crying anymore. That was the first thing I noticed. The tears had dried up fast, and what was left behind was something colder. Something I recognized from a long time ago. Mom stood beside her, one hand on Sophia's arm, like she was holding her up. But I knew that posture. That wasn't support. That was a warning. Mom was telling me without words, don't you dare ruin this. Tom leaned against a bookshelf, his arms crossed. He still had that look on his face, half confused, half angry, like a man who'd just realized he'd been driving with a bad map for a long, long time. Judge Martinez sat down in a wooden chair with a creak that seemed to echo. He looked at each of us slowly, the way you'd look at a stack of files before opening the first one. "All right," he said. "Let's keep this simple. I'm not here to run a courtroom. I'm here because a question was raised in that church, and I think we all deserve an answer. Sophia, you're the bride. Would you like to explain why your sister's signature is on that contract?" Sophia took a deep breath. She looked at Tom, then at Mom, then finally at me. When she spoke, her voice was soft, the voice she used with clients when a deal was about to go south. "Lena," she said, "I don't know why you came here today. I really don't. After all these years, after everything you put this family through. I thought you'd moved on. But showing up at my wedding and making these accusations? Accusations about forgery? Do you have any idea what you've done?" I opened my mouth to speak, but she kept going. The words came faster now, the way they always did when she was building a story. "You know, I tried to help you. We all did. But you were always troubled. Dad leaving hit you hard. We understood that. But the lying, the stealing. Mom, you remember how it was. The money that went missing from your purse, the jewelry. We never wanted to believe it was you, Lena. We gave you every chance." My stomach dropped. There it was. The old script. The one she'd written 13 years ago and had been rehearsing ever since. Mom's face tightened. She looked at me with those eyes I knew too well, disappointed, tired, ready to believe the worst. "Sophia," Judge Martinez said calmly, "the question was about the signature." "I'm getting to that," Sophia said. She dabbed at the corner of her eye, though there were no tears. "Look, I'm not proud of this. But Lena, she's my sister. I love her. When Tom and I started planning this wedding, I needed a co-signer for the venue because of some financial hiccups. My business had a rough quarter. Tom knows about this." Tom didn't say anything. His jaw was tight. "I knew Lena would never say yes if I asked her directly," Sophia continued. "She's been so angry for so long. So I used her name. Just for the contract. I knew she'd never find out, and I planned to pay everything off before it ever mattered. It wasn't forgery. It was a shortcut. A stupid, desperate shortcut. I'm sorry." She turned to Tom, her eyes wide. "Baby, I'm so sorry. I should have told you. I was just so embarrassed about my credit, and I wanted everything to be perfect for us." Tom stared at her for a long moment. "You used her name without asking? That's identity theft, Sophia. That's a crime." "It's not like that." Sophia's voice cracked. "She's my sister. Family helps family. Mom, tell them. Tell them how it works in this family." Mom straightened up. Her hand was still on Sophia's arm, but her fingers were trembling. "Lena," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "if you had just come to us privately, if you had called, we could have worked this out. There was no need to make a scene in front of everyone. In front of the whole community. Do you know how this looks? Do you know what people will say?" The old clock on the wall ticked. I looked at it without meaning to, and for a second I was back in our old house, the one with the clock that never worked right, the one that stopped the day Dad walked out. Mom had never fixed it. She said some things were better left broken. "You want to know what people will say?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. "They'll say Sophia Miller used her sister's name to sign a $60,000 contract. They'll say she's been using my identity for years. They'll say the only reason she could rent that venue, book that caterer, hire that band, was because she stole my credit." Sophia's face went pale. "That's a lie. Is it?" I reached into my purse and pulled out a stack of papers. Credit reports. Letters from collection agencies. Statements from banks I'd never walked into. I've been getting these for 3 months. At first I thought it was a mistake. A weird computer error. But then I started looking closer. The addresses. The dates. The signatures. I held up one of the letters. This one's from a credit card opened in my name 2 years ago. The billing address is your office, Sophia. The room got very quiet. Tom pushed off the bookshelf and walked over to me. He didn't take the papers. He just looked at them, his eyes moving across the words. 2 years ago, he said slowly. That's when we got engaged. Sophia's mouth opened and closed. For the first time, she looked genuinely lost. Not the performance kind of lost. The real kind. Tom, I can explain, you've been explaining, he said. And none of it makes sense. Judge Martinez leaned forward. Miss Lena, you're telling us that your sister has been using your identity for financial purposes without your consent for an extended period. Is that correct? Yes, I said. That's a serious accusation. Do you have more documentation? I have 3 years of credit history I didn't create. I have a debt of over $40,000 that doesn't belong to me. And I have the name of the real estate company that processed the venue contract, Sophia's company. Her assistant's signature is on the verification form. I looked at Sophia. She was gripping the windowsill now, her knuckles white against the dark wood. You want to know why I showed up today? I said. I didn't come to ruin your wedding. I came because I finally got a letter from a lawyer saying I was being sued for a property I never owned. A property you bought as an investment 3 years ago. In my name. Mom's hand dropped from Sophia's arm. She took a small step back, her face unreadable. Sophia? Mom's voice was barely a whisper. Is that true? Sophia didn't answer. She was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite place. Fear, yes. But also something else. Something that looked almost like relief. You think you're so smart, she said quietly. You think you've figured it all out. I think I've figured out enough, I said. No. She shook her head, and a strange smile touched her lips. You don't know the half of it. Tom stepped between us. What does that mean? Sophia looked at him, and for just a second, I saw her mask slip completely. Underneath the perfect bride, the successful realtor, the dutiful daughter, there was something desperate and cornered. Something that had been running for a very long time. It means, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, that this goes way beyond a wedding contract. It means that if you all want the truth, you're going to hear it. But I promise you. She looked at each of us, Tom, Mom, Judge Martinez, and finally me. You're not going to like it. The rain started again outside, tapping against the window like impatient fingers. Somewhere in the church, I could hear people murmuring, wondering what was happening in the back room, wondering if the wedding was still on. Judge Martinez folded his hands on his knee. Young lady, he said to Sophia, I've been a judge for 30 years. I've heard a lot of promises about truth. Most of them turn out to be half-truths dressed up for company. But if you've got something to say that clears this up, now's the time. Sophia looked at Tom one more time. Something passed between them, something I couldn't read. Then she turned to face me fully, and her smile changed. It became the smile she used to give me when we were kids, right before she'd blame me for something she'd done. Remember when Dad left, she said. Remember what you told me the night before he walked out? I froze. The room seemed to tilt. You told me, Sophia said, that you wished Mom had married someone else. Someone who wasn't Dad. You said you'd give anything to have a different family. Mom's head snapped toward me. I saw her face change, the old wound opening up fresh. That's not I started. You were 14, Lena. But you said it. And the next day, Dad was gone. And I always wondered. Sophia let the sentence hang in the air like smoke. I always wondered if maybe you got your wish. If maybe you made it happen somehow. The clock ticked. The rain fell. And I realized, in that moment, that I hadn't even started to understand how deep this went. Because Sophia wasn't just fighting to save her wedding anymore. She was fighting to rewrite the whole story of our family. And she'd just fired the first shot. The rain had stopped, but I could still hear it in my head, a steady drumbeat against the old windows of the reception hall. Judge Martinez hadn't spoken. Mom's face was a cracked mirror of grief and confusion. Sophia stood there with her hands clasped in front of her white dress like she was the one who'd just been wronged. And Tom. Tom was watching Sophia like he'd just discovered a locked room in his own house. I'd been silent too long. Everyone was waiting. "You want to talk about the night Dad left," I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. "Fine. Let's talk about it." I took a step away from the window, toward the center of the room where the wedding arch still stood, draped in white roses that now felt like decorations at a funeral. I was 14. You were 17. And you know what I remember about that night? I looked at Sophia. I remember coming home from school and finding you in my room. You were going through my diary. My private diary. And when I tried to grab it back, you laughed at me. Sophia's face flickered. You read a line I'd written after a fight with Dad. I had written that sometimes I wished Mom had married someone else. Somebody who came home for dinner. Somebody who remembered my birthday. I swallowed hard. You read that one line out loud to Mom the next morning at breakfast. You pretended you'd found my diary on the kitchen table. And Dad heard you. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. You remember what Dad did after that? I kept my eyes on Sophia. He stood up from the table, went into the garage, and started packing his truck. You and I both know why he left. It wasn't because a 14-year-old girl wrote something stupid in her diary. It was because a 17-year-old girl had been stealing money from his business account for months. She'd been using it to buy clothes, concert tickets, stuff she hid in a storage unit across town. Dad found out that morning. Not about my diary. About the theft. The room went so quiet I could hear the air conditioning hum. He left because his eldest daughter had been robbing him blind and then tried to blame it on her little sister's diary entry. He couldn't face it. Couldn't face what you'd become. I felt hot tears start down my cheeks, but I didn't wipe them away. He told me that years later, when I finally tracked him down in Arizona. He said he'd been too ashamed to stay. Too ashamed to confront you. So he just drove away. Sophia's perfect composure was cracking. Her nostrils flared. You're lying. Am I? I pulled a folded envelope from the inside pocket of my jacket. I'd been carrying it for 3 months, waiting for the right moment. It was beaten up, creased from being read too many times. This is a letter Dad wrote me before he died. Dated 3 years ago. He talks about the money, Sophia. He mentions the exact amount you took. He said he'd never told Mom because he didn't want her to live with the pain of knowing. I held the letter out to Mom. After a long moment, she took it with trembling fingers. Don't you dare read that, Sophia snapped. But Mom was already unfolding it. Her eyes moved across the page. I watched her read, watched her body language shift from denial to devastation. No, she whispered. No, this can't be. Dad wasn't perfect, I said. But he wasn't the monster you turned him into, Sophia. You've been telling that story for 13 years to cover your own tracks. Every time I tried to come back, you threatened to show Mom some new version of events. You told me if I showed my face, you'd convince her I'd stolen Dad away, that I was the reason the family broke. So I stayed quiet. I stayed gone. And you got to play the victim. Tom stepped forward. His jaw was tight. What about the venue contract? What about the credit cards? I nodded at him. I'd been dreading this part, but there was no way around it now. 3 years ago, Sophia applied for a credit card in my name. She used my social security number, which she'd gotten from old tax papers in Mom's attic. She listed her office as the billing address so I wouldn't find out. And then she ran up $40,000. Sophia's hands dropped to her sides. I have the statements, I said. I also have documents from a collection agency that finally tracked me down in Colorado. That's why I came here, Tom. Not to wreck a wedding. I came because I was being sued for debts I never made. And the venue? That contract was signed last summer when Sophia needed a deposit of 25 grand. She couldn't use her own credit because she'd already burned through hers. She put down my name instead. My name, my credit, my future. Judge Martinez cleared his throat softly. He'd been listening with his hands folded over his chest. Now he looked at Sophia with the same expression I'd seen on my father's face in old photographs. Profound disappointment. Miss Miller, he said, would you like to explain any of this? Sophia opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time since I'd walked into the wedding, she had nothing to say. She can't explain it, Mom said quietly. She was still holding the letter, her hand shaking. Because it's all true. I've known. I think I've known for years that something didn't add up. I just didn't want to look at it. Why not? The question burst out of me before I could stop it. Why did you always believe her over me? Why was I the one who had to leave? Why was I the one who had to carry all of the shame? Mom met my eyes. The wrinkles around her mouth deepened. Because you were the strong one, Lena. You were always the strong one. And your sister. She glanced at Sophia with a wounded tenderness only a mother could feel. Your sister was fragile. I thought she needed protecting. You were wrong, I said. She wasn't fragile. She was greedy. And you protected her so much that you let her destroy everything else. A sob escaped Sophia. It wasn't the practiced, sympathetic crying she'd done earlier. It was ugly and real. She pressed her hands against her face and her shoulders shook. I wanted a perfect day, she choked out. One perfect day where nobody looked at me like I was a failure. Like I wasn't good enough. I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry. But the thing about sorry is that it doesn't undo the years. Tom walked over to Sophia and stood there for a long moment. I thought he was going to embrace her. Instead, he gently removed his wedding ring from his finger and set it on the table beside the flower arrangement. I can't marry a story, he said quietly. I can't build a life on lies. Then he looked at me. I'm really sorry for what my wedding put you through, Lena. It wasn't your fault, I said. He nodded once, then walked toward the door of the reception hall. Sophia called his name, but he didn't turn around. I stood there in the wreckage of that perfect wedding, surrounded by roses and candles and three-tiered cake that no one would ever cut. The guests had all gone home. The caterers had packed up. All that remained was my family and the truth. Mom came over and took my hand. Her skin was papery thin and cool. I should have listened to you, she said. All those years ago. I'm sorry. I looked at her. I'd waited my whole life to hear those words. And now that they were here, they felt heavier than I'd expected. Not freeing exactly, but real. The way a river is real when you finally stop fighting the current and just let yourself float. I'm not the girl who left home when I was 19, I told her. I've built a life. I have a business. Friends. A cat who hates me but depends on me for food. A weak laugh escaped me. I came here to clear my name, and I did. But I also came here to say goodbye to the idea that I needed this family to forgive me. I don't. I never did. Sophia was still crying, slouched into a chair with her veil askew. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. What's gonna happen to me, she whispered. I knelt down so we were at eye level. I'm not going to press charges. Not for the identity theft, not for the credit cards. But you're going to take responsibility. You're going to call the credit agencies with me tomorrow and clear my name. You're going to pay off the debt, every cent of it. And you're going to tell Mom the rest of the story. The whole thing, no more hiding. She swallowed hard. And after that? After that, I don't know. Maybe you'll find out who you are when you're not pretending to be someone else. I stood up. I hope you do. Because the person you've been pretending to be. I think she could have been decent. But you buried her under so many lies she couldn't breathe. The clock in the lobby chimed 7. I realized I'd been at the wedding for nearly 6 hours. It felt like 6 lifetimes. I hugged Mom goodbye. It was a real hug, the kind we hadn't shared since I was a child. When we pulled apart, I saw Judge Martinez approaching. "Ms. Miller," he said. "You handled that with more grace than I've seen in my courtroom in 30 years. If you ever need a reference, or a character witness, you call my office." "Thank you," I said. He smiled faintly, then looked around the ruined reception hall. "Shame about the cake." I laughed. A genuine laugh, the first one in what felt like forever. Yeah. It was a really nice cake. I walked out of the old church-turned venue into a sunset that was painting the wet parking lot gold. My rental car was the only one left. I sat behind the wheel for a minute, letting the engine warm up, watching the light change. There's this hiking trail in Colorado, near where I live. It goes up about 3,000 feet and ends at a rock formation that looks like a giant's fist. I'd climbed it half a dozen times before I realized that the view from the top wasn't what I was after. It was the climb itself. The feeling of putting one foot in front of the other, trusting my own weight. Family is supposed to be the place you lean when you're tired of climbing. But sometimes it's the cliff that keeps crumbling under your feet. And when that happens, you have two choices. You can keep grabbing at the rocks and hoping they'll hold. Or you can find a different path. I'd spent 13 years hoping those crumbling rocks would turn solid. Today, I'd finally let go. On the way out of town, I stopped at a gas station and bought a cup of terrible coffee. It was bitter and a little burnt, but it was mine. I drank it leaning against the hood of the car, watching the stars come out one by one. The radio in the station was playing an old country song. Something about going home. I got back in the car before it finished. Because here's the thing about home. You don't always find it where you left it. Sometimes you have to go away to realize you've been carrying it with you all along.